Be respectful of everyone's time. I want to welcome everyone to today's virtual session on building a sovereign AI strategy with a responsible AI mandate. We not only welcome our global members, but want to extend a special welcome today to any guests out there that have joined to hear the information from today's session. Just as a reference, SustainableIT.org is a global nonprofit organization which was founded and is led by IT leaders who are really leveraging their knowledge of sustainability and IT to push forward those sustainable efforts within their corporations. So this is really a community that comes together to share best practices and lessons learned and work together to get to where we all need to be. If you're interested to learn more, you can always find us at SustainableIT.org. We'd love to welcome you to the community. For our members, just a little housekeeping before we get started. We do have a few upcoming sessions already on the calendar, so if you haven't already registered, just to give you a heads up, later this month, we're going to be digging into sustainability's financial and competitive impact. And then as we come into June, we're going to be looking at global sustainability trends. So to keep your eyes on, and hopefully you can join us for those. Also, extremely excited to let everyone know, if you haven't already registered, we will be in London on June 23rd as part of London Climate Action Week. So we are hosting an in-person event there. So registration is now open. We do have the QR code, and I'll make sure that the registration link is put in the chat for you as well. So we hope to see everyone there. It's going to be a great event. Just so that anyone who hasn't already known about it, we do have the Sustainable IT Playbook for Technology Leaders that was launched in January. This is the second edition, the first one being written by Nicholas Sundberg, who partnered with us, specifically Rick Pastor, to write this second edition. So 800 plus pages featuring over 70 IT practitioner input and 20 or more case studies from our members. So this is really about getting things done and making it happen, and how the best practices to do so. Today's session is based on a few chapters in the book and some references there, so it's a great taste of what the book offers. So without further ado, I do want to say that today's speakers are Bill Wong from the Infotech Research Group and Rainer Karcher, who is the CEO of Heartprint. We're also going to have a guest presenter from Aguero giving some examples as well. But we do want this session to be very interactive. So if you have comments, chat, Rick will be in the chat, making sure that we can bring forward your comments or your questions. So don't hesitate. You can also use the raise hand icon and come forward that way. So without further ado, Bill and Rainer, welcome.
Thanks, Sherry.
Thanks, Rick.
And welcome, Rainer. We go to our first slide. So really excited to be talking about this. I've always wanted to do something and try to make a difference in sustainability in the field of AI. And so I have the opportunity as an AI research fellow to meet with a lot of boards and CEOs. And one of the top questions they have is, how do we make this safe, this AI? They buy off that there's a lot of potential here. And that's where responsible AI kind of developed here. And the major tenets of responsible AI is that for applications, whether you build or buy, typically you want it to be built on representative data. You want the system is somewhat understandable. You just don't want to take something from a black box and follow it. You want to ensure security, and this is more than just personal security. It's security and privacy of your business processes. You want to ensure safety and security as well, because there's lots of new threat vectors. You want the system to be accurate, and a human in the loop is popular is also. So what we're seeing emerging as a core part of AI strategies and these responsible AI principles is sustainability. More and more, a lot of agencies that we work with in the public sector and including the private sector are putting sustainability front and center here. Now, when it comes to building sovereign AI, which is the main focus of today's talk, some of the key value drivers I've listed on the top upper left-hand corner. They're not all the possible value drivers, but these are the ones that we've heard the most to push and pursue economic benefits for the economy, having a secure supply chain, improving the efficiency of the public sector, to preserve language and culture, and to have domestic laws to oversee the safe use of AI. Go to the next slide. The next slide, and I'm not going to go through all the details here, but at a high level, these are the major components we see countries focus on. At the core will be data. You want data to be sovereign, and we'll talk about this some more. I think a big challenge that we'll be talking about and elaborating is how you define sovereignty. So, but data, having jurisdiction over the data, and then to build that infrastructure, the AI technology you're going to use to build it, and also that includes the underlying energy infrastructure as well. Talent sovereignty, the people to run the systems, but also countries are concerned about attracting talent to create the new and innovative AI applications. The other two, having regulations to govern AI, and then industrial sovereignty. And this is how countries want to attempt to integrate AI within the industries, key industries in their country. And if we go to the next slide. Yes. So here I'd like to hand it to my co-presenter here, Rainer, talking about data sovereignty. Rainer?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Bill, and thanks for already heading up the whole aspect. What you can see here is that we currently do have two major focus points. On the one side, we have the European General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, which has the goal to protect the fundamental rights and freedoms, ensuring that data has a high level of protection. We have on the other side the US Cloud Act, which is, as you probably all know, with the goal to drive global data access to support investigation. So it does come from a complete different angle. So on one side, we have a financial aspect. On the other side, we have a data protection aspect. Now, the question is, how can we find a way to have both represented and represented in both ways like we would like to have it, as we do have most likely conflicting interests. And the conflicts in that remark is just with a current example, which I think just came out 2 days ago. Microsoft, and this is not finger pointing against anyone, but just as a heads up, Microsoft just announced very deep somewhere in a developer's newsletter that now with the current large language models being used in Copilot, which is turned out to Anthropic and to Claude, they're processing data, even if they have, per definition, the data stored in European environments outside of that, and they can process it wherever they want to. And this is something which is, I think, a bit of a question where everybody has to ask, what is the starting point for my own sovereignty? Is it knowing where my data is being stored, or is it more knowing where my data is being processed and who has access in which way? On the next slide, please. We have, I think, a raising demand in that respect, and we have in many different aspects through AI an increased demand in many points. As we can see here, it's about elasticity. It comes with the demand, which is exploding and skyrocketing at the moment. I think that prediction of 9% of the total grid demand is already very optimistic. It will most likely get very much higher than that. And we have on the other side grid instability and reliability already through to different aspects. So I think that is something which definitely again increases the understanding and the transparency where the data is being stored, how they are being worked with. And finally, as we are here at SustainableIT, we talk about an increased carbon emissions. Therefore, in particular, in areas where data centers are being built without access to renewables or without the ability to store that in a high demand. And in addition, we have a topic which is mostly forgotten about, and even more important, most likely, water scarcity, because data centers needs to be cool. There is, as you can see here, 2 liters of water for every kilowatt hour of energy being used for cooling purposes, and that is something which already affects a lot of areas where there is a loss of water already. And finally, we have financial risk for those who are ratepayers, which comes then on top edition. That is just a quick overview on what, from our point of view, has definitely a huge requirement to have a focus on. You can find much more, as you can see here, in the runbook, which is in the surrounding and in our depth of the documents you can access to being a member of sustainableIT.org.
Well, I'd just like to ask a question then, since we're talking about the goals for sovereignty, the efforts to ensure data sovereignty and residency, and then we're talking about AI compute's basically environmental footprint becoming a potential problem. How does sovereignty affect sustainability? Is it going to make sustainability harder because we're going to have dispersed data that has to be resident in these different countries that are passing these rules? Or will that actually make it easier because we're not concentrating all that data in one zone, in one set of data centers and so on? What do you experts think about that?
Well, maybe I can start and then hand it over to you, Bill, and you're much deeper in that whole aspect, I think, coming up with much more data than. In general, I would say it is definitely making it, well, probably not easier, but more transparent, because what we all have to do is we have to start with creating an understanding of what do we do and how and why and where. And this is something where most companies at the moment don't even think of. They're just using AI for literally everything, and there is automation and processes enhanced with AI and coding with AI. And most of the companies don't even have an understanding of where the data is being processed, what's being done, and where and why. And talking about sovereignty, getting that understanding is creating then the underlying and the fundamentals to then have at least the ability to act different to what it had been. And that is definitely something where then at least the understanding of water scarcity and the electricity demand is at least in more clarity to react different, and to maybe put then, instead of large language models, maybe a small language model in front, or operate it more than in a local data center, which is powered from renewables. So I think it creates the fundamentals. But back to you, Bill.
Yeah, thanks, Rainer. Good points, and good question, Rick. I think you're going to see driving forces to make it harder and easier at the same time. Initially, I think, I'm not sure harder describes it, but there will be more demand for infrastructure. Part of driving toward economic sovereignty is what's driving a lot of countries is the concern of depending on a handful of hyperscalers and big tech AI vendors. And they don't want to repeat what's happened with cloud computing, where basically there's 3 vendors that have 70–80% of the data there and of all the compute. So countries, geographies will be building their own infrastructures. So yes, there will be a greater demand. But over time, I think that way you'll see a balancing, that the hyperscalers hopefully won't have to grow as big in all these multi-billion-dollar initiatives we keep hearing about, having to build the compute resources for AI, that'll get distributed and more localized, and you'll have more fit-for-purpose type infrastructures over time. But in the short term, we're going to see a big spike in demand for infrastructure everywhere.
Right. And although hyperscalers are noted for efficient server and data center management compared to the rest of us in our own on-premise systems, concentrating all of that compute power in a few companies is just not only bad for transparency, it just seems like whatever they say goes in terms of regulation and in terms of basically architecting all of this. They're going to do it the way they want to do it, and it may not be good. It may not be good for sustainability or for players in different parts of the world. Okay, thank you.
I mean, talking about different parts in the world, I think that leads directly to the next slide, if I'm not misguiding, which is maybe showing with a very, very current example why at least an understanding of where is my dependencies and sovereignty does play a huge role. I mean, if you look to the Strait of Hormuz in Iran at the moment, where there is a war affecting 20% of global oil and LNG trade, which has a huge effect, at least to us here in Europe, in regard of energy supply. Same to the US, not only for prices coming on then our own cars and gas stations, but it has a huge tension in Iran, because any escalation is driving then the energy prices, disrupting the supply chains, and in particular for data centers. So there was Iran as a counter of the attack in their own country, attacking then data centers all over the Arabic countries. So data centers in Dubai and in other areas has been strongly affected, in particular from hyperscalers, US-based hyperscalers from AWS. And the current US administration policy with dismantling IRA is then, in addition, then jeopardizing green energy investments. Luckily, it hasn't had the effect yet, at least if you look at the current investments all over the world in renewables. So luckily, even with that policies, it doesn't have too much of a bad effect. But in still, the dependency of such kind of aspects has a huge role, in particular for security aspects then as well. So therefore, digitalization is a huge factor to get resilient, but only if you have an understanding how and where. But Mark, I think you have the hand raised.
Just a very, very quick question. So they all talk a good game about renewable energy, but none of them are actually powered by renewable energy. They're just using money to buy renewable energy credits. And then there's the other elephant in the room, which is 90% of all new AI-powered data centers are using gas generation, so gas generated for power. So they're not actually doing what they claim they're doing at all, and they're going to be powered by gas for at least 70% of the time. But for some reason, we let them get away with making a lot of these claims, which are provably false.
I couldn't say anything else, but yes, 100% agreed. So therefore, and it makes it even worse. I mean, powering up then in case of Microsoft, and again, I'm not pointing against them, but don't get me wrong. I mean, powering up a nuclear power plant out of the 60s, which already had a major issue, just to power the data center and telling everyone it will be fine, nothing will happen. Well, questionable. And I agree with you. I mean, there is a lot of aspects which we still just simply accept, and we don't have any questioning of what would be alternatives. And I mean, already getting to that in a couple of later of our slides, we do have alternatives. There is alternatives. There is options which we all have. We just have to choose them wisely. But I think, Bill, you have a comment on that as well.
And I would agree very quickly, then I'll be quiet, is the challenge that I see is the hyperscalers. Everyone talks a game about that people are going to be using AI at the edge, or they're going to be using different providers. The unfortunate truth is the big hyperscalers and the big AI providers are not going to let go of the revenue that easily, because they want this revenue, they want to control it, and they're tying people into long-term contracts and commitments that they can't escape out of. And we also have the issue that enterprises and governments are not very wise when it comes to how they buy. They basically buy from what they know, and they're committing huge amounts of spend which people can't get out of as well. So if we're going to grow localized providers, which is good for our economies, we might even get some European unicorns again. We actually need to be willing to do our bit and then actually spend the money with them, because they can't exist without the money being spent with them. They can't do the things they want to do.
Correct, 100% agreed. And I agree with Katja, never be quiet, Mark. This is exactly what we need to have, and that's what we wanted to have, a good discussion. Bill?
Yeah, I just want to add to your comments, Rainer, that energy certainly is a geopolitical issue, but actually most of the components of AI is becoming or has been a geopolitical issue. Like with data, as Rainer pointed out earlier, a lot of countries are being driven because of the Cloud Act to make data sovereign. And again, AI, I had the opportunity to talk to the developers in Latin America, the kind of the sovereign AI model that they're building. And I saw examples of how hyperscalers, their models. I'm not going to pick on any one, but typically very stereotypical views of, people living in Latin America and the icons that they would generate. And they wanted a model to better reflect the people, the culture. And the way to do that, they thought best, as most countries are doing right now, is to create a sovereign AI model.
I will be quiet, I promise, but it's I would go back on the point that we let the big providers get away with making false claims about sovereignty that senior people are willing to accept when they're not sovereign in the slightest, never can be, never will be. But we let them put in their marketing and get away with it. What we need is actually an industry-wide sovereignty scoring that explains actually the impact and makes them come to the table with honesty and transparency rather than marketing.
Yeah, unfortunately, I wrote about a communication that was leaked. Reuters broke out the news of a communication to all U.S. ambassadors, and the ambassadors were ordered to whatever country that they were working out of to put down and discourage any sovereignty efforts by any of the countries. And they're doing that for multiple reasons. One, to help bolster the growth of the local hyperscalers. But again, they view, rightly or wrongly, sovereign AI efforts as a threat to U.S. dominance. So that's something to be aware of.
And without that, you would have known. And I swear we haven't paid Mark for giving us that bridge into the next slide. We need to maybe think about what would be alternatives and what would be possible examples of what is currently happening all over the world. And we have collected a couple of initiatives. That's definitely not a full list of everything. It's just a bit of an overview, giving you an understanding and a thought of what's happening currently all over the world. And well, it's hard to say, but in at least a minimum portion, I'm even thankful to a US president named we have currently in front of us, who is pointing us into the urge and into an enforced need to gain that momentum at the moment globally. So thanks, Mr. Trump. Sorry for being that straight. But yeah, we have maybe, you can read it yourself, a lot of aspects. And Rick, you wanted to maybe add a portion here as well from the US.
The U.S. is always happy to be a catalyst for various things.
Obviously, absolutely. No, and
what's your view from Canada? I mean, how serious is it there? And it looks like they're linking sovereignty directly to environment, which is great.
It's great. And I'd like to get your input on this too, Rick. So when I started to do research on sovereignty efforts, I think sovereignty is one of the great catalysts for sustainability. I see a lot of sustainability efforts, but they have a struggle on getting to the agendas of the governments, of the boards, of the commercial entities out there. But more and more, we're hearing stories that say, "Hey, we're concerned about this infrastructure. We're concerned about local electricity rates. All these things are making it are highlighting the need for a sustainability strategy." So this might be one of the best catalysts for the drive for sustainability that I've seen. And Canada, we are quite fortunate that we have lots of energy. We're driving to be an energy superpower, and yes, and they when they're currently in development right now, we have a contract out there, an RFP for, I think it was 700 plus million to build an infrastructure. But part of that is also to ensure that the energy is going to be local, and it has to meet a certain power requirements. I've submitted RFPs to public institutions in Canada, and we had to prove to them, on paper, the amount of power that this would consume, because they had requirements and it's the only time I've seen that from a client, is these kind of requirements for sustainability. So hopefully we'll see more and more of that.
And just adding to the Canadian approach, I think what is quite clear looking at that picture is none of our countries is able to do things just on their own and be the counterforce to the tech bros which are sitting in Silicon Valley at the moment. So it will require partnerships, it will require collaboration, and it will require people coming together with the right ideas and the right momentum. And just the symbolized pictures on the next slide, which has most likely been going through press and media quite recently. Normally there would be two names written. On the left hand there is Aleph Alpha, which is a Heidelberg, a German-based AI and large language model, and on the other side there is Cohere, which is based in Canada. So Cohere and Aleph Alpha just decided to join forces. Aleph Alpha, for example, is being used in the Federal Agency of Employment here in Germany. So big institution. They are using that for their internal chatbot and for their internal employees, and now they're just joining forces. And I think that is exactly what we need to have in the future. There is so many initiatives worldwide which are looking into sovereign aspects. So naming another one, which is Apertus from Switzerland. Apertus comes from ETH Zurich, and they are the one and only at the moment fulfilling the European AI Act, 100% being open source and being completely transparent to what they do. Very much focused on energy efficiency, for example, which is part of the EU AI Act. And I think that's exactly the examples what we will have to put our force into and our strength into. But talking about examples, I think we are handing it over in the next slide to much more practical examples, don't we? Oh, no, we have another measuring.
Before we look at the data localization trend, just Rainer, I'd just like to ask you, is the EU the sovereignty driver for all EU countries, or is Germany driving sovereignty for Germany? Is France driving sovereignty for France? Just can you clarify that?
Well, I think it's a bit similar than what the states in the US are doing. The US is, if we look at it from the European part, then it's a one big thing, but in reality, it's not. I mean, California is much different than Texas and I don't know, Boston, and the same is valid here for Europe as well. So we have definitely a couple of drivers, as mostly it's the Nordics who are very much pushing. So as we have seen in the slide before, there was Denmark mentioned, we have Sweden, we have Norway, which is in particular coming from renewables, definitely a driving force. We have Poland, for example, which might surprise some of you, which is very much in the forefront at the moment in educational aspects on AI, and therefore driving the topics here as well. We have for sure Germany, we have Switzerland, and France in addition as well, where there is a lot of initiatives currently being running. So there is definitely a lot of countries. Do we have the collaboration which we should have? Definitely not, maybe not yet, but are we on a good way, and are we trying to bring things together? Yes, we do, and SustainableIT.org is definitely playing a huge role on that and trying to push things further.
So when we're thinking about complying with sovereignty and strategizing our AI architecture for sovereignty, we have to not only look at what the EU is pushing for, we have to look at other countries that we're going to be doing business in processing AI and potentially. So it's a lot of moving parts to keep track of, I guess. Bill?
Yeah, I'd like just to add to Rainer's comment there, and a little trivia about Cohere. It's one of the few AI models that you can run on-prem. Even the cloud, the hyperscalers, when they say, well, we can do hybrid type offerings, I do not believe you can bring down everything from the cloud and run it on a local server. And I think the EU is kind of leading the world in building an on-prem and private cloud infrastructure out there. And if you decide to build, let's say, a significant AI infrastructure and delve into HPC type of hardware, this is something the cloud vendors can't do as well. Their business model is really economies of scale. We can virtualize. You know, why would you want to go elsewhere? But with HPC systems, they're massive, and they can't virtualize those as well. And there's so many performance latency restrictions that you wouldn't want to do that, and the cost would just be, it just would not be cost effective. when you could have a local resource there. So the trivia about Cohere, it's based out of Toronto. That's where I'm calling you from today. And one of the founders of Cohere was a researcher on that seminal paper that was released, All You Need Is Attention. So one of that researcher went off and became the CEO of Cohere. And I think it's great evolution. I mean, it was great to have a large language model vendor in your backyard, but understand it's going to the next, I guess, stage of its growth. I think partner with Germany is a really smart move here, and Germany's a leader in sovereign AI efforts as well. And to France, Mistral. We're seeing a lot of interest in Mistral as an open, I believe it's an open weights model used to power a lot of sovereign AI models. Now, data localization. So this, Rick was kind enough to pull this from the Stanford AI report that they put every year. And for this year, this is the first time they've introduced a new section focused on sovereign AI efforts around the world. Now, data localization refers to those rules and regulations that govern local data. So you want data to be resident, and there are rules to govern that. Sometimes it's the same as sovereign, but not always. But to talk more about data sovereignty, if we go to the next slide, I'm going to hand it over to Annalie.
Thank you, Bill, and nice to meet you all. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk. I'm very glad to be with you. So I will present myself quick so you can have a bit more of context. I'm Annelle, and I'm working for Agoro as a research consultant. So I spend a lot of time dedicated to research into sustainable AI. And particularly identifying practices for the responsible and sensible use of AI system. Maybe just 2 words about Agoro to give you a bit of context. It's a French SaaS editor dedicated to sustainability with primary focus on sustainable IT. Our purpose is to help customers to drive their sustainable journeys. We started with Green IT, and we're now capable of addressing sustainability as a whole, moving from pure environmental needs to cost efficacy. So we have GreenOps, nearly FinOps project, and we work with international customers in pretty much all verticals. In several European countries, even in the US. So, for example, with Schneider Electric, Michelin, Crédit Agricole, and big names of public sectors. And as part of R&D, I've been working on responsible AI by analyzing around 50 international and French frameworks, from which we extracted over 600 questions and action to support the development and use of AI. So it was quite a lot, and we then consolidated this work into a practical catalog of 35 key actions. And each of these actions supported by a detailed fact sheet, included one about sovereignty that you can now see on your screen. In the case of France, the vision of sovereign AI is to ensure control over the infrastructure on which the AI system is developed. It's to develop AI systems that comply with legal requirements, such as the European GDPR on personal data privacy that was presented, to develop and deploy AI technologies based on its own infrastructure, data set, and expertise, to have a local development of the AI system and establish rules for data storage, retention, and deletion that comply with legal requirements. So the first thing we see as a good practice is to have a reflection on the implementation of the AI system, to ask oneself about the data residency It's about where your data is physically stored and processed. The key idea is to prioritize local and environmentally responsible hosting. That means using infrastructure located in your own country, if it's in a low carbon area, or within your company, and selecting a data center with a lower carbon footprint. One European recommendation is also to ensure compliance with European requirements, such as the EU Code of Conduct for data center, and to integrate environmental criteria into infrastructure choices, for example, about energy consumption, cooling system, or overall efficiency. And so it's important to find a balance between sovereignty of your AI system and environmental criteria, and that's not always easy. As you explained before, it's a balance to find. Now, if we move to the next practice, you can change. Yeah, thank you. Moving to data sovereignty and the need to ensure the protection and confidentiality of the data used by the AI system. So the objective here is to ensure that the data system used in the AI service is kept under the organization's control, participating in the sovereignty goals. So this includes using trusted cloud providers that comply with the European regulation, and implementing strong security measures such as encryption, authentication, and access management. And another key practice is to rely as much as possible on open source solutions and local data ecosystems when developing the AI system. So this increases the transparency and reduces the dependency and strengthens overall trust in the AI system. And about what you can see on the slide, we tried to, for each best practice, to put some environmental benefits for implementing the action, because this was the main purpose of work initially, and that's we all try to make AI more responsible and sustainable, if we can say so. So we try to put some environmental impacts, and also put some financial benefits and efforts and costs to implement the action. So the person in the organization can make a balance between all the action and see which one to implement first. And we also try to split some KPIs, environmental and financial, so that everyone can really make this practice its own and implement it in the firm in the easiest way possible. I tried to be quick on this, but if you have more questions, of course, you can ask me.
All right, thank you.
Okay, this is our last slide, and then I'll hand it over back to Rick to take you through some of the resources here. So if we should summarize kind of a best practices here, at the start I mentioned it all starts with your principles here of what drives the organizations, be it commercial or be it governments, and really to make sustainability part of your responsible AI principles. And that way you would build the controls, your governance programs, your risk management programs. You would treat it also as a risk category that you don't want to exceed certain thresholds. Next, assess kind of your current state. I think the big challenge here is to really define what we mean by sovereignty. We're not expecting countries, and most countries will admit this too, that you're not going to do sovereignty for the entire AI stack. You're not going to build your own chip manufacturing plant. At least most countries are not going to do that. There's a handful that could actually do that, and they are pursuing that. But for the middle countries, like Canada, like let's say France and Germany are middle plus countries, but outside of the US and China, most other geographies and countries are not going to be able to do the full stack. So define what you mean, and it'll come down to a assessment of risk judgment. Can you have assurances? Do you trust this infrastructure where some components will not be domestically developed here? Mandate green by design. So yes, you do want to favor the local ecosystem here. RAG is the retrieval augmented generation. Just to explain that acronym. Inference workloads, and then finally, I mentioned the technology stack. So at the highest level, most people will consume AI at the applications, but if you want a sovereign infrastructure, you're going to select tools, foundation models. Very key component there many countries have defined sovereign strategies, and they're going to use OpenAI. Now, some countries might say that that's not sovereign. Others would say, well, we understand that, but we don't have the resources to build a comparable model like that. So we're going to take that risk and trust that they're not going to share all your intellectual capital information with other countries. The platform infrastructure, that's the hardware. People are looking for alternatives, or maybe not. Again, depending on your resources, you really have to define what's feasible. So again, unless you're the US or China, you're not likely going to be able to build that entire infrastructure to be totally sovereign. And then, yes, and to have a sustainable source of energy here. So sustainability really permeates over all the components really of the sovereignty strategy, but where a lot of it is kind of the impact is felt first is when you build that infrastructure and power that infrastructure component. And with that, I'll pass it over to Rick. Unless anybody else wants to add comments here.
And certainly any questions or experiences with this from our audience would be good to chime in here now. One of from the book that we put together, one of the strategies we basically said was important in the face of sovereignty movements is to not get locked into one vendor, right, for your AI stack elements. That's common sense, really, and IT has always been careful about that. Not always, but it's one of the tenets of flexible IT. So that's important, more important than ever because of this. And in terms of other architecture for sovereignty impacts, whether or not you're trying to be completely sovereign in your infrastructure, you have to anticipate these policies in these different countries that you're doing business in. So it's all like Annalie talked about. It's about how you're architecting your data. Basically, where's the data, where it's running, where it's moving, and how it's moving. And the idea is that you may need to emphasize local storage, and you may need to emphasize small language models, which we've been saying for a while it tends to be more sustainable. So all of that has to be something that your architects think about, and when you put this sovereignty catalyst in front of them, to say manage for future sovereignty rules that we'll have to abide by, basically. I think that's the defensive strategy, not the offensive, but the defensive strategy. All right, we can go to these next slide where there's actually a lot of resources out there.
Rick, Reiner's got his hand raised.
You did?
Yeah,
Okay.
I was just going to ask whether everybody is understanding what has been shown already from Bill here, and this is you need to have a strategy in place. You need to understand where to start, which is very much different maybe from depending on where you are. So I think exactly as Bill pointed towards, the question is, what's the effect you can take, and what's the starting point you have to look into? Is it data? Is it something else? In particular, in Germany, we have the tendency to overreact, and everybody is then just over trying to make things even more sovereign than they have to be. And one example I've just seen recently is that companies are trying now to get away from Microsoft and everything they do, get everything away from Office and the Office suite. Well, you always have to keep in mind that your company still should be up and running, and your employees should be able to use what they are dealing with each day. And this is something where I think sovereignty doesn't mean that everything has to be turned away from US. And exactly as Bill pointed towards, we are anyhow not able to do so 100% unless you are China or the US. So therefore, it's a question to start with a strategy in mind and to define that strategy first, and not already start dismantling anything you have and replacing it out of a sudden with anything else. So this is something which I would like to just add to what has been said already. And which is probably giving a bit of a thought of what's maybe then good, why SustainableIT.org is here, because that is giving you an example of other companies already doing that, and examples of good practices and do's and don'ts, and a good exchange.
Awesome. Hi, Katya. Oops, gotta get you off mute.
So a couple of things. First, most importantly, Bill, thank you. I think today, every day, I kind of get a reminder why I need to leave the US and come back home to Toronto. So today was just another, I don't know how many of these reminders I need before I get off my butt and make that decision. And so to answer your question, Rainer, that, yes, right? So the sovereignty makes sense. And this is just a comment, right? So from where I'm sitting, this is so tricky because, I'm part of an organization that literally has partnerships with everybody listed on this slide. We have, right? So, I mean, it's public who our partners are with. We have many, many models. We go to market to sell it. We use it internally. We use it internally to improve the products that we use with other partners. And so this all makes sense. Realistically, and I wish, and I think Pindi might be on the call. She's on my team. She knows several of you on the call, right? We that's our focus, a huge focus this year, is how to wrangle all those cats, going back to the old EDS days. So this makes sense, and there's pockets of things that make sense, and the definition of responsible, that all makes sense. Practically trying to put this in place and deal with the politics associated with revenue generation on these tools and partnership commitments, financial commitments, this makes it, and then to compound on what Mark's commenting on, right, the lack of transparency, this just makes it so hard. And some days just to a point where you're like, what am I even doing? Right. And so yes, what you said, get it, makes sense. And if we were lived in this bucket here with one country and one model and one thing, this would be so much easier. The reality, at least where I live, that's not the case. And I feel like I'm just fighting a battle I'm not going to win, not giving up, but this just gets very hard.
Hi, Mark.
Sorry, it's me again. The one thing that worries me when I see slides like this is the kind of thing that will get cut and pasted by a hyperscaler or AI provider to cement the fact that they claim to be sovereign. So they're not sovereign, never can be, never will be. It's as simple as that. And we need to stop letting them get away with it by putting them on slides like this, because they can, no matter how many people they put in region, no matter how many operational tools they put there, no matter how many data centers they deploy, they will never, ever, ever be sovereign. They cannot be. Not until the day where they separate the corporate governance and operate as a totally different organization in every single way with zero share ownership going back to the US. And that's the problem. And I even see people justifying it, saying, don't worry, the local team will never let the US access the data. And is anyone really naive enough to think that a local team would not bow down to the leaders if they were told what they had to do? And so I think what I would love to see would be this kind of group creating almost a matrix that actually shows the key decision criteria that affect it, and almost a score at the end to say how sovereign. Because yes, they do have local data centers, local infrastructure, and that's all good things. But it still doesn't mean you have any form of legal protection. So from a governance and regulatory perspective, you are still as exposed totally. There's nothing you can do about it. And having that score would be really important. And we could weave into that, again, the total lack of transparency on any environmental metrics. Because these guys spend more money on lobbying against transparency than they do in providing metrics. So if we could do that, we could then haul that out into the open and really start holding them accountable and showcasing the people who are doing it. So people like the OVHs of the world, the Scaleways, all the really good people who are trying to do genuinely local things to create local jobs, to boost local economies, rather than taking revenue from a country and shoveling it offshore into a low tax jurisdiction.
Is there
It's
any
part of
kind of
social buying
existing
responsibility.
sovereignty index? Is there anyone reporting on that globally?
Not really.
I haven't seen.
Some people
I
try.
actually might take a swing at that. I'm building a kind of guidance on developing this, and if anybody's interested in seeing a preview of it, it will be out within the next couple of months. But that is something, since I'm tracking it, and I'm going, it wouldn't be that difficult just to kind of rank all these ones. But if you're interested in that, let me know. I'd be happy to share that with you.
At least to have the factors you're assessing about these different vendors and programs. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, let me go back and reinforce some of the points. I really agree the comments Rainer mentioned. Sovereignty at its best is a collaboration where you're finding like-minded other kind of middle countries to drive your own domestic sovereignty efforts. It is not, at its worst, is countries who I would say are not doing it right or misunderstand the purpose of it is when they want to isolate themselves. And very, very, very few countries will be successful with a strategy like that. So, kudos to the open source folks. Recent development like DeepSeek just came out, DeepSeek 4, and it's interesting. They made the model available both on NVIDIA and the Huawei chips there. So that was a really good move and a smart move by them, not to isolate themselves to, let's say, either side. So yes, you want to collaborate, you want to create that network to drive and select your partners like-minded, that countries who have similar views and perspectives there. There was something else that will come back to me. Well, resources here, as Rick was pointing out, I did put the cloud vendors there just to be politically correct. That again, not all countries are going to have the resources to kind of build their own models. The hyperscalers do have sovereign offerings, but it comes down to what is your definition of sovereignty. If it is to have control and jurisdiction, then the hyperscaler offerings won't cut it. But again, it's a matter of it'll come down to how comfortable are you with the risk that potentially you won't have jurisdictional control. Let's see, and again, this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's so many more vendors. I just kind of put down what I could fit on a page. So apologies if your favorite sovereign tool isn't here, but this will be expanded upon in future releases. And if we go to the next slide, resources, Rick, that you can talk about.
This is our IT toolkit for responsible AI, which has been out for about a year now, and we're adding a new piece to it, estimating AI's environmental impact. The next slide, Sherry, though, it shows you some general papers about sovereignty, AI infrastructure impacts. So those are worth checking out, and also how to get in touch with Bill, and if you're interested in taking a look at that sovereignty assessment that he's working on, and also the regular newsletter that he produces on this topic, as well as a YouTube channel that he is running. So just wanted to make sure that was mentioned. So we're about done, I think. So I want to thank Bill and Rainer and Annele for sharing your perspectives on this rapidly evolving situation. And Katia, thanks for jumping in, and Mark as well. And this is not the last thing we'll say about this topic, I'm sure. And it'll continue to come up as we talk about responsible AI and governing the scaling of AI effectively. It's an undercurrent that we have to be aware of. It's an architecture factor that we have to think about, and no matter what country you're in. So thank you all for joining, and I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your
Thank
day.
you.
Rainer, thank you too. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.